Nice. I didn't get your license. What are your license?
I'm Parker.
Parker, very nice to meet you. Yep, Parker, all right, what are your licenses? Oh, do we need to get going?
No, you can finish up.
I like to meet everybody first.
We can.
I'm actually in science.
Okay. What does that mean?
It's basically to become an actuary who usually deals with like risk and optimal transactions.
Okay. See, I don't try. I've learned to not pretend like I know what people are talking about when it comes to their field, because many times I'll go, oh, of course. And then you'll ask me a question, I'm like, oh, and I have no idea what to say. So I'd rather just say, I have no idea what that means. It's a good place to start. And what's your Yeah.
That's what I go. What's your? I want to come around. I think it's gonna pop around here.
I got you. Sorry, I got all my stuff.
So
Sorry.
I have.
what's the period?
Like you both know.
See, that's the one I hear the most. That's,
Yeah.
I'm the one who gets it. Cold War, okay.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just, we did like a mini series on Cold War. We did a lot of the docu-series of things. So just need to. No, guys. Good. You know, Cabot. What's your name?
I'm Alex.
Alex.
Nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm
Ellie.
Yes.
Ellie, nice to meet you.
Tyler.
Tyler.
And Max.
Max.
Aiden.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, very good. All right, I like to hear everyone's majors. If you have, I know there's people undeclared.
I'm a psych major.
Psych, all right. Okay, please don't tell me all of your psych majors. It's subconscious, and it's not gonna be good.
No, I double major in sociology and economics.
Okay.
And actually computer science.
Computer science. All right, I like asking my friends about computer science. This year, I've been getting very scared about that. So I'm asking, do I need to be scared of like years?
Well, it's kind of scary, especially if you're an artist.
No, this is,
you know.
This is not what I'm here. AI, all good. Not going to switch the world.
Well, I mean, you can't treat Terminator like a documentary.
Yeah.
You know, treat it like it's the real world. It's gonna, that'll be us in the coming years. Yeah.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. I mean, what if there was like an AI host for AOI, you know? Oh, really? Oh. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there like a type of biology, treatment biology, environmental, somewhere around that? I'll talk through. You're environmental, yeah.
I'm in environmental biology.
Okay, right on. We got another one, kind of, not totally sure, but.
Okay.
Okay. All right, thanks for being here. I'll talk for a bit and then let you just. I'm coming.
I can get us started here then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are blocking me.
Those are all blacked out.
I'll get you after, okay?
Awesome. Well, if you wouldn't mind, I just have a few words to
Yeah.
say first.
Oh, for sure.
Thank you guys, everybody, for joining. If you don't know me, my name is Cabot Phares. I am the president here for Turning Point USA at Illinois State University. I'm also a local radio host for some conservative content. So if you want to check any of that out, look up Speechless with Cabot. You'll be able to check that out. I really appreciate it. But I just want to say a huge thank you for all of you for coming out today for this event, and also in any way engaging with Turning Point, whether you agree or disagree. This is my 4.5 year being involved with Turning Point here at ISU. I started the chapter here back in 2019, finishing up my 2 majors, and I actually graduate in a week. So this will be the last event I'm a part of here with Turning Point USA at ISU. Hoping to still be involved in my future, but it has been a very interesting 4.5 years for me. When I was just starting the club, I was assaulted by a professor. We have had obviously verbal assaults against us, death threats, so much, simply for trying to share a differing opinion. And honestly, no one trying to share their opinion should have to deal with that. But I'm sure that Cabot has probably dealt with similar things, as well as many people over at the Daily Wire. And so that's why it's my honor to introduce the senior editor of the Daily Wire, as well as he has a great laundry list in his resume, 400 million plus views on YouTube. He's a partner with YouTube, as well as he used to work with Campus Reform, as well as the editor-in-chief over there. And we love that. So everybody, please join me in giving Cabot Phillips a warm welcome.
Thank you, guys. It's great to be here. This is my first time at Illinois State. I've been here for like 30 minutes, so I'm not going to pretend to know like everything going on campus. So I might speak in some generalities, and some of you are like, he's wrong, that's not what our campus is like. So you'll have to forgive me on that. How many of you guys are already familiar with the Daily Wire? Hopefully, yes. It warms my heart. It makes me very happy. I, like many of you, probably found the Daily Wire through my boss, Ben Shapiro. Like, I remember distinctly the day that I was on YouTube watching completely non-political content, and then there's on the side, it's like, Ben Shapiro destroys liberal students with facts and logic. And like, well, I have to click on that. Like, okay. And then I noticed like they got more and more intense over the years, where it was like the headlines drinks the blood of feminists facts and logic, metaphorically, and I was like, okay, this is getting crazy. And then I watched like way too many Ben Shapiro videos. I noticed my voice was like morphing into his, and I started saying with my friends, I would just start, well, hypothetically speaking, I would just start talking like Ben. I did not get as smart as Ben, unfortunately, but I realized like I think I hear Ben's voice more than my own mother's every week. You guys laugh at me. I'm sure there are some of you who it's the exact same way for you guys. You can be honest, it's okay. We'll sort of support you for that. I like seeing the hands going up, knowing Daily Wire. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands for how many of you guys listen to the podcast that I do called Morning Wire. Don't raise your hand if you do listen, because here's why. I have been in a room like this where I've asked people, you guys familiar with Daily Wire? And I'm like, woo, Daily Wire. So I'm like feeling myself, and I'm like, and my podcast, Morning Wire, and like not a single hand went up, and it's just crickets, and I don't want you guys to see a grown man who's heartbroken in front of you. So we're just going to assume that all of you guys listen to the Morning Wire podcast, right? You guys listen? Thank you. Yeah. You're still like, no, I don't. You're supposed to play along with me here to feed my ego. But if you don't listen to Morning Wire, this is me begging you to go listen to Morning Wire. It's just a 15-minute morning news podcast. We do this crazy thing where we don't tell you what to believe. We don't give you a bunch of opinions. There are plenty of people who do that. That's great. But ours is just straight news. We just tell you what's going on in the world. It's called journalism. This is crazy. It's called journalism. We just say, here is the facts. Make up your mind for yourself. One of my favorite compliments about the show that we get all the time is reading through our like reviews on iTunes, and there will be some 1-star reviews. But people will say like, I've been listening to this show for 3 months. And I just found out this week that it's from Daily Wire, a conservative site. I can't believe it. They've been trying to trick me, like 1 star. And I'm like, that's actually not an own. That actually is a compliment, because it means we're doing our job if you didn't know where we lie on the political spectrum. And like, it's kind of a cell phone to you that you're like, well, I'm not listening anymore because I found out who the bosses are. So it's just straight news. We just tell you, hey, here's what's going on. So please go listen, mainly so I can stay employed, and also so I can impress my wife by showing her the iTunes charts. Make her think that I'm cooler than I am. Anyways, I am very happy to be here on campus. I love going to campuses and talking to people about what's going on in media right now. I've been working in media for almost a decade now. I say almost a decade because it sounds a lot more impressive than 9 years. It's been 9 years, but I say almost a decade because it's just a gravitas that comes with that. But I've kind of seen like the way that the media operates. I used to live in DC and New York, and I did more of the mainstream media route. And I kind of got like a peek behind the curtain at the way that the media operates, the things that they do, and the ways that they manipulate and deceive us as Americans. I want to give you guys just kind of like some feedback on what that's like, and kind of give you a peek behind the curtain of the way the media operates. The first big thing that I noticed very quickly on in my time in media is that they are very careful to curate the types of opinions that you have by deciding which ideas you get to hear, and more importantly, who you hear them from. The media won't tell you this, but they want you guys to think that you're crazy, especially young conservatives. They want you guys to think that you are radical. They want you to think that no one else has your opinion. They want you to think that if you're a young person in America today and you're conservative, that you're crazy. They want you to think that simple truths that we all know to be true are false. They want you to think you should not speak up because no one else will agree with you. They do this by deciding and curating the types of ideas that actually get out. And so when we talk about like social media, big tech censorship, and we talk about the media, we talk about social media, the way they operate. If you ever like look up the media, you're consuming news and you're like, I don't really see people my age, or I don't really see people of any age sharing my opinions. Like, does no one agree with me? They're doing that intentionally, and there's a reason for it. I saw this very early on. I used to go on CNN. I'm not proud of that. It's something, it's kind of like a recovery thing that I'm still dealing with. There's a lot of PTSD that comes with having been a CNN contributor at one point. I wasn't a contributor, I should just go on. I didn't sign a contract, I never do that. But I saw this my first time going on CNN. So it was back in 2016. Times were simpler. It was a good time. 2016 was a good year. You guys remember 2016? You could, they had these things that you could buy called houses. They were like $20. You could buy them. You could go to the grocery store and like you could just buy eggs for like $3 and milk. And I went to the grocery store this week and I bought a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos because I'm a cultured American. It was $7 for a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos. And I said, 2016 wasn't like this. So the year is 2016. It's a good time. Trump had just gotten into office. I worked on the Rubio campaign in 2016, so I was very slow coming around to Trump. I was still in the phase of like, this is screeching, like never Trump Republican, like, no, he's gonna destroy the world. This is gonna be terrible, this is awful. So Trump gets in office and like, one of his first things he does is he starts this trade war with China. So he starts implementing tariffs and all this stuff. I did what every prestigious journalist who's gonna change the world does. And I did a Twitter thread thinking, I'm gonna change the world with this Twitter thread. This is the one. And so I just said, hey, I'm a conservative, President Trump, you're wrong on this. This is bad, here's why I disagree, blah, blah, blah. The world has not changed afterwards, unfortunately. But what did happen is my world changed because a CNN producer slid in my DMs and they said, Cabot, we saw your posts on Twitter. That was amazing. We want to get you on the show. Can you come on? And I'm like, really? CNN wants me to come on? Like, I thought they hated me. I'm a conservative. I thought I was a terrible person. Okay. So I go on CNN. And they introduced me and they say, oh, we have a conservative here who's speaking out against Donald Trump. Cabot, what do you think? And so I go on, I basically said what I said in my thread. Yeah, Trump, I disagree with you, you're wrong on this, whatever. Come off set, and the producers are just, they're glowing. Cabot, thank you so much. And they use this phrase, one of their favorite phrases, Cabot, thank you for speaking truth to power. That was so inspiring. They're like, we've been looking for more young conservative voices like you. We want to get you back on more in the future. So I'm like, I'm like, yeah, okay, see, CNN likes me. This is kind of cool. So then like a week later, there's this terrible mass shooting that happens. They reach out and they say, hey, Cabot, can you come on the show? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And they go, we're talking about the Second Amendment. Do you want to talk about the Second Amendment on CNN? I said, yes, I would love to talk about the Second Amendment on CNN. Now, they never fully asked me for all of my opinions on this. And if they had, I don't think they would have had me on. How do I put this? I'm the Second Amendment person that like, I'm somewhere between like F-18 in your backyard to like recreational nuclear weapons for citizens. I'm the Second Amendment person who, has read the Second Amendment and understands what it's about and understands the Second Amendment is not about deer hunting and killing skeet shooting. Those are fun, great things. You should all do that. But the Second Amendment is about this citizenry being armed so we can defend ourselves against governments when they turn tyrannical, as they inevitably do all throughout time. And the whole point of the Second Amendment is so that we can have a means of defending ourselves when our freedoms are being infringed upon. I'm like that kind of Second Amendment person, So I go and see them. They say, we need to ban these dangerous weapons of war, these assault weapons. And there's a 4-person panel. I see Cabot Phillips, I always remember this. And they go, okay. And they all say, yes, these are terrible weapons. We need them off the street. Cabot, what do you think? And remember, to them, I'm like one of the good conservatives. I'm like the good one they can rely on, be reasonable, not a crazy conservative. And I asked them, I say, hey, does anyone at this table know what an assault weapon is? Can anyone define an assault weapon for me? Anybody? And it got quiet, and they go, well, you know it when you see it. And I said, that's not an answer. Can anyone define it? And they go, it's a weapon of war. And I say, hey, you guys can't define it because it's a made up term. It doesn't mean anything. It's a term that you guys use as some umbrella to try and take people's property from them, and you guys can't define it because it's not a real thing. And then I told them, hey, people get mad at the media because the people who go on the media don't actually understand the things that they're talking about many times, and they just know these talking points they're supposed to repeat. They don't actually have any nuanced opinions on what they're talking about. So you know what we did? We had a spirited hour-long debate on the topic of the Second Amendment. We exchanged our ideas. No, that's not what we did. That's not what happened at all. You know what they did? You ever watch the Oscars where like someone gets a speech and they talk for too long and the music comes on and they're just like, okay, get off. They did that to me. So they turn the music on, they're like, okay, we had some breaking news earlier in the show, we got to mix around the show. Sorry, we're gonna end it there. We'll get back to this. So I come off set, and the same producers last time were like, amazing, thank you. They looked at me like I was a crazy person. I am a crazy person, but they looked at me like I was a really crazy person. They're like, yeah, that was great, so sorry, we're gonna cut it off, we'll get you back on. I never heard from CNN again. They never brought me back on. Can we clap for that? Just big band from CNN. Thank you. That is how I convinced my wife to marry me. I'm a bad boy, certified CNN band. So I laugh about it at the time, and like I have the video I show my friends, and like, this is funny, whatever. But it's really not funny, and it actually is, looking back, an indication of the way the media operates, and also the way that our culture more broadly operates. I experienced this, where they showed me the path to acceptance. They showed me, hey, here's what you got to do for us to stop calling you a Nazi and a racist and a bigot and a xenophobe and all these untrue things. Here's what you have to do. All you got to do is just give us some ground. Just be useful for us. You don't actually want to voice all these like crazy conservative opinions, do you? And they showed me, they said, they kind of dangled the social approval in front of me, saying, hey, here's what you got to do to get us to stop calling you all these things. And the second that I went against them, they didn't say, well, you were reasonable on this thing last week, so we'll give you the benefit of the doubt now, and we'll assume that you were a reasonable guy and you have good intentions. No, that's not what they did. The second that I was no longer useful for them, they shut me out and they stopped putting me on. And that's what our culture does more broadly, especially to young conservatives, and especially on college campuses. The left bludgeons you guys with the threat of social ostracization. They bludgeon you with the fear of being kicked out of your friend group, of being labeled as a racist, of being, denounced as all these terrible things, and they're going to call you all these names. And they use that as a threat, essentially saying, hey, if you want us to stop doing this, you have to stop doing what you're doing. And they show you, they kind of dangle in front of you, like, hey, if you want us to accept you and approve you, you need to keep your mouth shut, or you need to give us some ground here or there. And I want to encourage you guys to understand, you cannot reason with an outrage mob. You cannot use logic to work with a culture that is acting in a mob mentality. That's what they're doing. And I want to also encourage you to remember, you can't ever give them enough to where they're going to pat you on the back and say, you know what, we'll let this one slide because you gave us some ground last week. In the same way that CNN shut me out when I was no longer useful for them, when I started posing a threat to them, that's what our culture is going to do to them. So stop trying to win their approval. You should not want the approval of a culture that hates what you believe in. I'm going to say that again. You should not want the approval of a culture that hates what you believe in. If the culture, the people who control our culture, who are overwhelmingly on the left, if they are giving you a pat on the back saying, hey, you're doing a good job, or if they're not looking at you a little sideways, it's probably a problem. If you don't have people calling you names, it probably means they don't view you as a threat to their power. The people that start calling you names, and the people that start trying to shut you up, the people assaulting you and threatening you, harassing you, they're doing that because they care about power. And we show them, as conservatives, when we shut up, we show them the path to silencing us. And we show them we care more about their acceptance and their approval than we actually do our values and truth. Do not fall for it. Our culture today does not care about freedom of speech. They don't care about freedom of religion and expression. They don't care about the freedoms granted to unborn babies. They do not care about protecting the Second Amendment and rights. They don't care about those things. So why should we want them to approve of us? We should want them to think we're a little crazy. And so I want to encourage the young conservatives here, like, you should have people looking at you a little sideways. You should have some friends that are talking behind your back. You're a crazy conservative. I should have known better about them. That is a sign that you are a threat to the people who hold the power. And you should not want to earn the approval of a culture that does not care about what we believe in. Another big thing that I've seen in working in media is the way that they manipulate language, the way that they try and use these blanket terms to silence people. One thing that they've been big on lately in trying to keep people silent is this idea of privilege. The idea that you have privilege if you're a white male, if you're a Christian, if you're straight. There's all these different privilege boxes they want to lump you in. And they do that because they want to keep you quiet. They want to make you second guess about speaking up because you think, well, I don't really want to speak up right now because I think they're going to say I'm speaking from a position of privilege. They're going to say that my life is easier and so my opinion is going to carry less weight. They don't want to actually talk, the media, they don't want to talk, our culture doesn't want to talk about where the privilege actually lies in our culture today. If you're on a college campus today in America, the biggest privilege that you can have is being a leftist. The liberal privilege on a college campus is the number one privilege that you can have that's going to bestow upon you the absolute most gain. There is no such thing as conservative privilege. Like, there is no privilege today in being a white male. There is no privilege in being a conservative on a college campus because you guys have to deal with things that liberal students never have to deal with. There are not events on college campuses with liberal speakers that you have to have police officers at because there's threats of violence. Now, thankfully, that has not happened here yet, thankfully. Thankfully, that's not happened here. But I've been on plenty of campuses where I've been ushered out of kitchen or back kitchen entrances to buildings. I've had police escorts on the highway. I've had some crazy things. And we've all seen the videos on campuses of the way that conservative speakers are treated. You know what's not a thing on a college campus? A conservative mob. You know what's not a thing on a college campus? Conservatives getting together. Like, imagine conservative students getting together and saying, okay, there's a liberal speaker coming to our campus. So let's put our black masks on. Let's get friendly. Let's get together. We're going to shut this event down because we can't let anyone hear liberal ideas on campus. We cannot let this go forward. This is a threat to the student body. We cannot let these ideas get out. That does not happen. There are not examples of conservative students shutting down liberal speakers on college campuses. I have gone around campuses with a $100 bill before a video camera saying, hey, if you can give me an example of a liberal speaker being shut down on the campus where they canceled the event because conservative students were so outraged, I'll give you $100. I got to keep the money because there are not examples of that happening. Every single month, there are examples of liberal mobs on campuses trying to do that against conservatives. That is a problem completely exclusive to the left on college campuses. Liberal privilege means you get to go to your class and you never have to worry about your professor grading your paper differently because they disagree with you. The number one question that I get from students, I've spoken to thousands of students, I've been on 130, 40 plus campuses. The number one question I get from students is saying, hey, what do I do when I have to write a paper in my class and it's a biased, starting point for the essay, the assignment, and I know that if I write my actual opinion, that my professor's going to grade it differently. What do I do when my professor, if they find out my opinions, I have to worry about reprisal from them? What do I do? That is the number one question I get from conservative students. And that is a problem that does not exist for liberal students. Liberal students know that they can go to class and they can have whatever laptop stickers they want. They can raise their hand and say whatever they want. They can be in whatever club they want. No professor's ever going to treat them differently because the overwhelming majority of college professors in America today, we know this. There's study after study on political donations from professors in America. There was one study last year, the top 100 schools in America. They looked at the political donations, the dollars spent in like the 38 states where that information is public. For college professors, there was a 45-to-1 ratio of dollars donated to Democrat candidates versus Republicans. 45-to-1. There are universities in America, plenty of them, where there is a 5 to 10% maybe of college professors who identify as conservative. That means liberal students have the privilege of knowing their ideas are going to be shared in class. They don't have to say anything. Conservative students know, hey, if I go to class and I don't share my opinions, or if I go through campus for 4 years and don't share my opinions, I don't know if that really get out. If you're a liberal student in America today, you can go to class, you can go through campus all 4 years. You do not have to get involved in activism. You don't. You can sit on your hands all 4 years. You can hang out in your dorm room. You don't have to get involved because your ideas will get out to the people around you. They will. People would see them on social media because of the way that the big tech companies have their algorithms rigged. You can see that the liberal students can go to class and know, oh, my professor, they're going to share my ideas. There we go. The universities, the speakers that they bring in are overwhelmingly liberal. They know that their ideas will get out there, from everything from Hollywood, entertainment, to academia. Conservative students don't have that privilege. They don't have the privilege of knowing, hey, My idea is they'll be shared. I don't have to do anything. Liberal students have that privilege. Don't let them bludgeon you into thinking that you are the one that has all the privilege. When on college campuses today, we know who has the privilege. It's people on the left. The final thing that I've noticed, and I don't want to get to questions, that's fine. But the final thing I've noticed working in the media is that they want you guys to hate America. I don't say that like as this hyperbolic statement. I say it because it's true. The media wants you to hate your country. It used to be that you could be patriotic, like, 5, 6, 7 years ago. It used to be like somebody could wear like an American flag shirt. I see your American flag hoodie right there. I walked in, I'm like, yeah, he's probably on my side. Because a patriotic sentiment now, like publicly showing your pride in America, is now inherently a political statement. It used to be you'd see a guy with an American flag on his truck, or you'd see a person wearing an American flag shirt, whatever, posting something on the 4th of July about how they're proud of America. And it's like, I don't know who they voted for. I have no idea. Like, they just love America. They realize how good they have it. Now, when people do that, okay, yeah, they're probably conservative. Because the left and the media controlled by the left has made this enormous push to try and make people, especially young people, hate their country. Why do they do it? Why do they want you guys to not be proud of your country? Because it's very hard to get an entire generation to go along with fundamentally revolutionizing our culture, our systems, our institutions. It's very hard to get people to go along with that if they think that their country and their culture is something worth preserving. If you convince people, an entire generation, that, hey, if you're proud of America, you're proud of all the worst elements of our history. If you're proud of America, you're actually proud of white supremacy and slavery. If you're proud of America, you are taking pride in all of our nation's sins. So then they come along and say, hey, we need to completely upend our culture. We need to reverse and revolutionize our economic systems. We need to change our government. We need to stack the Supreme Court. We need to change everything. And you say, well, hold on, I disagree. Like, I think our culture is a good thing. I actually think our founding principles are good. They say, well, wait a second. Are you proud of all those terrible things?'re proud of America? Didn't you just hear me? So you're proud of all those terrible things. And they try and use that as a tool to make you less or less resistant to the changes that they want to push. And I always ask people when they try and say how evil America is and how our founding fathers had it all wrong and how terrible our founding principles are, I always ask them, why have the true social justice warriors throughout history argued for us to be more American? Like the real social justice warriors, not the ones now that say they're social justice warriors and they're fighting imagined injustice and they don't realize how good they have it, but the real ones throughout history. Frederick Douglass, when he was arguing for the abolition of slavery, when he was writing letters, go read his letters that he was writing to Abraham Lincoln, members of Congress. He was writing letters saying, hey, he was quoting the Constitution. He was saying, hey, remember in the Constitution, remember like less than 100 years ago when our founding fathers, who you guys all claim to love, remember when they wrote these things that all men are created equal? Yeah, what about that? What's going on? Why aren't we doing that? We should live up to that. Frederick Douglass wasn't saying, no, we need to start completely over. He was saying we need to live by the founding principles. We need to actually live up to this aspirational idea that our country is founded on. Martin Luther King Jr., in one of the last speeches that he ever gave, he said, hey, our founding fathers dug deep a well of freedom that we must now fill up. Our founding fathers dug deep a well of freedom that we must now fill up. Was MLK a closeted white supremacist because he was saying that we need to do what our founding fathers and live out the vision that they set forward? Of course not. MLK was arguing for us to be more American, saying, hey, the ideas were right. The execution was not. MLK wasn't saying we need to rewrite our Constitution, we need to completely change all of the principles this country was founded on. No, he was saying we need to live up to those principles. Ask the people that tell you to hate your country. Ask the people that tell you that you should be ashamed of what your country is founded on. Those questions. And understand that you should be damn proud of the country you live in. Understand that we have it better in this country than any society or culture has ever had it, that we've created freedom for more people in a truer sense than any civilization has ever existed, and you should be damn proud of that. And you should not let them make you fearful of expressing pride in that. Now, the solution to this is not to say, well, America, it's been perfect throughout time, and try and contextualize everything. No, that's not what you should do. Of course our country has had sins in the past. Of course our country hasn't always gotten it right. But it's important to understand the context, to understand, hey, our founding fathers, they had this aspirational creed, this aspirational idea of what we could be. We didn't always live up to it, but those principles they put down on paper for all of us to live by, that's eventually how we got to the place we are now in this freedom. Take pride in that.
I feel like I've been a little negative, so I want to get positive here for a bit and encourage you guys. I want to encourage you guys to be bold as young conservatives. I always think of my mom. I had that mom who every day would drive my brothers and me to school. This big public school in Atlanta. She'd pull up, she'd roll the window down every single morning. The last thing I heard, she'd roll the window down. She'd go, "I love you, boys. Do something for Jesus today." Why are you guys laughing? That's my mom we're talking about. Okay. Your mom did the same thing. Okay. So we both have weird moms. Okay. And we both have trauma to work through. Right? So every day that was the last thing I heard. And when you're like 5 years old, you're like going to kindergarten. "I got you, Mom. Yeah." And then you're like 8 and you start to get a little self-conscious and you're like, "My friends are around. This is weird." And then you're like 30 and it's still happening. And it's like, "This is weird, Mom. This is very weird." Every day that's the last thing I heard. And I asked my mom about this recently. I was like, "Remember every day you'd always yell, 'Do something for Jesus today'?" I said, "Why'd you do that?" And I'll never forget what she said. She said, "I wanted to give you deep emotional scarring and have to work through a process to be tough." I thought that at the time. No, she said, "Hey, I wanted to remind you that you came from a Christian family, that people in your school knew that you came from a Christian family, and that they were going to judge what a Christian was based on the way you lived your life and the interactions that they had with you. And I wanted to remind you that you had to walk worthy of that calling and understand that when you walked into a room, people knew, oh yeah, that's the Christian kid, he comes from that Christian family." And there's a weight that comes with that. And I think in many ways that's young conservatives in America today. Because it is so rare for people to be an outspoken college student who's conservative, because that's so rare, word gets around. Like, people know who the conservatives on campus are. When you start tabling and going out and you start going around and getting involved in conservative activism and raising your hand in class and talking to your professors, talking to your friends, going through your dorm, putting out flyers, when you do that, word gets around. People are like, "Oh, that's not a conservative kid." And because of that, you don't just have a freedom to speak up, you have an obligation to do so. Because people are going to judge what a conservative is on how you live your life. I said earlier that liberal students have the privilege of knowing that people will hear liberal ideas on TV and movies, from entertainers, in class, on social media. Conservatives have to understand that the idea of what a conservative is coming from those very same institutions. And it's a warped idea of who we are and what we believe. And we can either wallow in that and say, "Man, this sucks. I wish all the institutions weren't controlled by the left. They all have the wrong idea about who we are. This sucks." Or we can say, "Okay, I'm going to go change the perception. I'm going to go control what I can control and talk to people and show them what a conservative actually looks like." And so there's a weight that comes with that of understanding. It's on you. There isn't backup coming. It's really easy to think, "Oh, somebody else will do it. Someone else will speak up. I don't have to be the one that does. Someone else will do it." There isn't backup coming. Like, you guys are the ones that have to do it. It's really easy to think, what will happen if I start speaking up? What will happen if I start sharing my ideas in class with my friends? Like, what, will I lose some friends? What will happen? You have to start thinking, what will happen if I don't? What's going to happen if I don't care enough to speak up? What will happen? How many people will graduate having never heard our ideas? How many people will get this best idea of who we are? What will happen if I don't speak up? And I think hopefully people in this room understand how special our country is. And I think a lot of people in this room, I hope, love their country. You cannot say that you love your country if you're not willing to stand up and fight. You can't say that you love your country if you care more about social acceptance than you do preserving your freedom. You cannot say, "I love my community, I love my campus, I love my country," and then say, "But I don't really love it enough to have people call me some names." You can't. You can't do those things at the same time. You have to say, "I love my country enough to be willing to risk those things." And that's what we need. We need people standing up and fighting. So I encourage you guys to count the cost. Understand it is worth it. It is worth it to stand up for what you believe. You never look back on a cause that you fought for that mattered. You never look back and say, I was a little too invested in that. I wish I hadn't really cared that much. You never do. The regret comes in looking back and saying, I wish I had done more. I wish I cared about this more. That was really important. That was an inflection point in our culture and in our country. I wish I had done more. Do not have that regret. I don't want that for you guys. I don't want it for myself. Get involved. This stuff matters. It does. Our country is worth preserving. And do not let yourselves be convinced that it's not worth fighting for. So I'm going to end it there. Let's get some questions. Can we just clap? Yeah, can we clap? Clap. Yeah.
Real quick. I definitely want to say a few, so we're going to get to the questions and everything. I want to make sure that I say a few thank yous to Riley was the main one who set up this event. My vice president will be taking over as my president. I also want, and so thank you, Riley, for that. Everybody give him a big round of applause. You took a lot of lead in getting this event going. I also want to just say thank you, period, and reiterate what Cabot said about getting involved. Everybody, I have no regrets in everything that I've done. In fact, while I definitely made some enemies here at Illinois State in my 4.5 years of being an activist, I made some of my best friends. One of my best friends, Josh Bender, who many of you guys know, he will be my best man at my wedding. Met him because I got involved with Turning Point. I have plenty of friends here right now that I've also made through it. I have a network of great friends nationwide because of the involvement I've had with Turning Point. So I can't reiterate that enough. But let's get into some questions. I know we have some people that disagreed. Because of the survey, I have names, but I don't necessarily need to name drop you. But if you have questions and you disagree,
Read the names. We're putting them on a list.
But if you disagree and you have a question, we'd love if you would be one of the first ones to raise your hand.
I'll get to everybody, and I'll stick around after and talk to people I talk to. If you don't want to ask a question publicly, I understand, but I will be here to talk to them.
We'll also be taking a group photo.
Cool. Speaking of photos, I gotta start sending new photos. I don't know who sent this photo, because like this guy looks like he's gonna sell you a used car. He does not. When I look at that photo, I don't see like wisdom. But guys, let me tell you, I saw a study recently. Beards raise your IQ by 15%. I never knew that, because you can sit here while you're thinking you go like this, and your IQ just goes up. So I would highly encourage everyone. Yeah, I need to get a new photo. Anyways, questions. What do we got? What are we going to talk about? Literally anything. It can be something I talk about, or it can be anything. We got a lot going on in the world, so hopefully there's some questions. Yes, sir.
I'll start us off. What was the most disturbing thing you got from the media? And you went to see that?
Oh, the most disturbing thing I got from media. Realizing how many people don't actually believe what they say on air. I spent a lot of time, I did hundreds if not thousands of media interviews. So I spent a lot of time in green rooms and makeup rooms and talking with people who go on air. And I was shocked at how few people actually believed what they said on air, and how many people, frankly, on both sides. This is something both sides do, but I saw it a lot on the left. How many people would go on and say once again that they didn't believe because they knew, hey, this is like what is supposed to be said. This is what's expected. Like I have to give this image because I want to keep getting back on air. I want to, strike fear in people's hearts, or I want to push this narrative. And like in personal conversations with people afterwards, realizing like, oh, you don't actually believe that. Like you're just playing this caricature, and that was really sad. And so that was one of the more disappointing things that I saw. Yeah, it's a good question. Yes, Ellie?
Yes.
Ellie, yes.
So, you talked a lot about in your speech about liberal ideas, right? And you talked about how like a liberal can go to their class and write about a topic, and as long as the professor agrees with them, they're all good. So what ideas are we talking about here?
Yeah.
What biases? What are these papers about?
So not even that if a professor agrees with their ideas that they're all good, but that they can express ideas that a professor will not have a red flag come up and say, oh, you can't say that, that's problematic, like, oh, that's bad. So it's not even the agreement, it's the ideas that are acceptable and tolerable on campus. Like pretty much anything left of center, there are some ideas that aren't, but anything left of center, the overwhelming majority of professors are gonna look at that and say, yeah, there's no problems here, like I don't have any issue with this. And so, I think there's any number of issues. So at my last job, I was the editor-in-chief at a website called Campus Reform. So I spent 4 years on a website. We covered liberal bias on college campuses. We ran thousands and thousands of articles that students would send in, examples of times that their professors had graded them poorly and put in the margins in the notes, like making it clear that their opinion was the issue. We had recordings of professors giving lectures on ideas, teaching them as fact. Like there are thousands of examples of that. But I think there's all sorts of issues. Like you've got, I talked about the Second Amendment. You've got abortion is a huge one, where when people are talking about the unborn and talking about the realities and scientific truth of what abortion actually is, which is ending an innocent human life, that is a huge issue that professors are going to come at you for. The transgender issue is a huge one, like gender reality and pronouns, like when professors are compelling students to use pronouns and telling them, hey, if you don't do this, there will be punishments and repercussions for that. That's a big difference between speech that you aren't allowed to say, which is bad enough. Like a free speech code is bad enough. That's one thing. But compelled speech is a completely different step, where professors are compelling students and universities are compelling students, telling them not just here's what you can't say, but here's what you have to say. That's a big issue. I think gender is a huge one. I mean, capitalism, like we had hundreds of stories on our site of students sending in things that they had written about capitalism or that their professors had been espousing about the evils of capitalism and things like that. So I think it'd be easier to say the issues that aren't controversial than the ones that are, because I think you could there's very few like milquetoast conservative opinions that you can have. But I think the majority of conservative ideas and thought are the ones that professors are going after. And again, I would encourage you, campusreform.org, I don't work there anymore, but that's the website I used to work at. You can scroll, it's like been going for like 10 years now on the website. You can see story after story of not just like a professor says, oh, I voted for Joe Biden, like whatever. I would prefer you don't tell people you vote for, but whatever. But like at an institutional level, like assignments that are being given, the ways that universities are offering funding, the types of speakers that they're spending money on, the types of speech codes that they have, who they benefit, things of that nature at an institutional level. I think that's the bigger issue. Caroline?
Yes, I just sort of had an example of that in one of my classes a couple semesters ago. We were given a prompt of grammar, and using correct grammar was a racist thing. And basically we had specific sources we had to use and say why grammar was racist. And if we said that we just think that it's good to have a standard, then like we got a bad grade on it.
Yeah, that's a very common one that I've heard recently, especially, which also I think like that questioning of itself is very racist to imply that like using correct grammar is somehow like a tool of white supremacy. And I think it's George W. Bush, who I don't love George W. Bush. Not a huge W fan. However, he had a quote I love. He said, hey, our country is befallen by the soft bigotry of low expectations. And this idea that we should change the standard for people that we view as somehow less capable of reaching standards. And that started out as this idea that was kind of fringy on the far left, this idea that we should change standards based on the way people look or their gender, whatever it is. But that has now infiltrated our education system. Look how many university systems, look how many institutions as a whole are lowering standards for people in the name of equity. And they're essentially telling students, especially like Black students, Hispanic students, Native American students, they're telling them, hey, we're not really confident that you're going to be able to achieve this test score. We're not really confident that you're going to be on the same level as your Asian and white peers. So instead of helping you and encouraging you and empowering you and saying, hey, you can get there, we're going to help you, we're telling them you're probably not going to get there, so instead we're just going to lower the bar for you. I think that is incredibly offensive. And I think that is a deep problem that is creating institutional rot in our academics and our education system, because we're essentially telling people, hey, like the way that you look, the family you were born into, that's going to determine the standards. And I think that's incredibly offensive. The Supreme Court actually just had a great ruling on this, where they struck down a form of affirmative action in academic admissions, where Ivy League schools, go look at the data on SAT scores and GPA and the relation for acceptance rates. If you're an Asian student in America, you have to score about 460 points higher on your SAT than a Black or Hispanic student to get into the same university, the same GPA, but 460 points higher on the SAT. That is racism against Asian students. And so some Asian students put in a lawsuit, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, hey, you're discriminating against these Asian students. It's not fair. And so schools can no longer do that. So they're going to try and find new ways around it. But I do think that that's an example of just, again, the soft bigotry of low expectations. I'd rather empower people and say, hey, let's help you meet the standard as opposed to lowering the standard. Yes.
How much that bothers me.
Yeah.
Because I'll say it from my perspective, because I went to a junior college before this. I felt like my teacher was like, basically silently calling me stupid.
Yeah.
And it's like, why do you think I can't get there? Like why are you looking at how much melanin I have in my skin and saying, oh, you can't do this? It's like, the freak I can. Hand me the paper. I'll show you how much smarter I am than you think I am.
Yeah. I have a friend at church who's a Black guy, and he's a medical student right now. And he talked about how at the hospital system, some of the doctors have talked about how when they started putting pictures on the website for doctors when people were choosing their primary care physician, and they started putting pictures of the doctors, and people saw that their doctor might be Black,
that the disparity, more people were picking white, Asian, Indian doctors. And he was saying, hey, that hurts, but I don't think it's them saying, I would never let a black doctor treat me. He said, I think what's happening is people are looking at what's going on with medical school admissions, and they're looking at what's going on with affirmative action in medical schools, and they're saying, hey, is this doctor actually up to par? Or did this doctor actually have like a lower 10th percentile on the MCAT and they got into medical school because there was an affirmative action thing? And he said, I had a great test scores, I'm a good doctor, and he's like, I don't want people to judge me on that. And so you're actually hurting the people that you're claiming to help because you're making people think, are you actually qualified? You are creating racism because the system is now saying, hey, let's give people questions about if the people that they're working with are actually qualified. That's a terrible thing to do. That is an awful, awful idea that they're only going to create more racism. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nobody, I want to let everybody
I'll
else.
get you next. Yeah.
It's kind of a two-parter. I want to know, blanket, what your answer to the first part would be is, what do you think is the biggest threat to the free press right now?
The biggest threat to the free press. There's a few things. I mean, the first one that jumps out to me personally is the influence of money. Now that sounds like kind of like, what are you talking about? But understanding how much money it takes to operate a large newsroom, and understanding like the large like behemoth news outlets and the institution papers like the New York Times and Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, those papers, and then the legacy outlets, how much money they have and how many like the resources that they have at their disposal. They have thousands of people in their newsrooms, and because of that, their influence is enormous. And because they have bottomless pits of money that they can spend. And so when people talk about, like, a lot of conservatives I hear, they complain about a lack of alternatives, where they say like, yeah, everyone knows Fox News and Fox is all right, but like, I wish there were more alternatives. And people complain about that, but then they say, what do we have to do? And I think a big difference is like, it's so difficult to create a viable alternative without all of that money. It's very hard to get that off the ground to scale. And so like, we're trying to do that at the Daily Wire. We have 250 employees right now. But our CEO, Jeremy Boring, who's a fantastic leader, he talks about how he's like, hey, it's just a drop in the bucket compared to the left right now. We're trying to challenge the established media culture right now, but ultimately it's a drop in the bucket. Like, we have to grow, we have to scale, we have to make more money so we can spend more money. And like, kind of the starting point right now, we're way behind. And so like, the influence of money and understanding, like, they can spread so much more misinformation and leftist propaganda than we can because they have access to so much more money, and that's a huge issue.
Well, and that's kind of where I was going to go with the second point. Is so when it comes to money and how they raise it, big business specifically is a lot of it. And we even saw Elon Musk just about a week ago basically say, "F the advertisers and I'm off." How do you think that how do you think public knowledge is influenced based on, and the free press, based on how much of a role big business plays in the media and in the free press? I mean, I doubt Jen Usel is necessarily deciding what Ben Shapiro says, but Pfizer kind of got Tucker fired. So.
I'm not sure the extent to which the role of big business. I don't just want to talk on my butt and like give you an answer for the sake of an answer. I'm not sure. Like the logical side of it would be, of course, the media's stance and angle is going to be influenced by their advertisers, of course, like you would think that. And so I don't know the full extent of it. I do know that there are there are companies that report to advertisers, and this is where it's kind of inside baseball in the way that advertising works in media. There are these companies. There's one, I think it's called Newswick or NewsGuard. So they basically grade news outlets on their accuracy. They grade them on like DEI initiatives, and they grade them on like the language that they use. And if a website is deemed like transphobic or homophobic or bigoted, racist, whatever it is, like these terms I just throw around like anything, then they report to advertisers. They give a score to every website, every news outlet. And these are huge conglomerations. They have their fact checkers going through and grading every outlet. And then they'll report to the advertisers. and the advertisers will pull funding from outlets that get bad grades from these incredibly biased organizations. And so that's a way that they're able to influence the money because they only give good grades to liberal outlets. We get strikes from NewsGuard where they'll fact check one of our stories, and we will send an appeal and say there is nothing wrong. We have an entire team of fact checkers at Daily Wire because we know they're going to try and do this. But we will send a line-by-line breakdown of a story and say, this is not wrong. There's nothing that's not factual here. And months later, they'll say, oh yeah, that was our bad on that one. They'll remove the strike. But it still influences our grade. And so they'll go to advertisers and they'll put pressure on them. And those same companies will then go to advertisers and they'll pressure them and say, you have money on this website that is deemed all these terrible things. And then they put pressure campaigns to get them to pull the funding. So I think that's like a big way they do it. That was a long rant, but that's like a big way that they do it. And that's incredibly concerning. Question here, and then I'll come back here. Yes.
You talked a little bit earlier about two-way and Second Amendment stuff and assault weapons.
Yeah.
So our lovely governor passed an assault weapons ban last year, and it was written by a legislature that knows absolutely nothing about guns. So they ended up actually banning both actions. They banned all Remington 870s on accident and all sorts of other crazy stuff. They banned a large, all sorts of
Bolt actions.
Yeah, so they banned like Remington 870s because, all right, the way that they did it, basically, they didn't ban them as like an assault weapon or whatever, but they also banned high capacity magazines. They didn't put an exemption in the high capacity magazine ban for manually operated firearms, so they are banned in a high capacity magazine. You can't sell them because of the
Okay.
Anyway, the case in the Seventh Circuit, rigorous kind of came down, and it basically spit in the face of ruin. They said you can ban these because they're all, you can ban 6-hour handguns by the military and all that. Do you think that that's an issue that the Supreme Court is eventually going to have to take off with all the splits and circuits across the
I do, yeah. I do think there's going to be we've seen recent Supreme Court cases where it's all like DC versus Heller was a huge one for concealed carry. Ultimately, I do think that unless it's a really sweeping ruling that they put down, states are going to find a way to get around it. And so I don't think that there's going to be like a huge change that comes. I'm not super optimistic on this issue. I think it's going to get a lot harder actually, because there are going to be state governments that find a way to get around it and essentially dare the federal government to do something about it. And so, yeah, I don't think that there's going to be a positive ruling on that. Similar to Roe, where for years conservatives were calling, hey, we overturned Roe v. Wade. And there was this kind of, I think, a misconception on the right that if you just overturn Roe v. Wade, like abortion would be out the window. But all it did was just send it back to the states, and then very many abortions still happening because states were able to legislate how they choose on a lot of these issues. And so it would have to be an incredibly sweeping rule, which I don't see them doing. Unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah, you had a question. I'll come to you next.
I had a question going back to his question over there. What he was talking about was the idea of like funding from media, right?
Yeah.
And something that we put out in the pamphlet that we passed out, criticism of Turning Point USA, is that they receive a lot of money from the Koch brothers, the oil super.
Koch brothers.
Koch brothers, sorry. Yeah. So I guess what's your response to that criticism?
Yeah. I'm not affiliated with Turning Point directly, so I'm not maybe the best person to ask on this. I think they do fantastic work, so I'm not going to, wipe my hands of the organization or anything. I will always say that when it comes to donors giving to causes, for every dollar that you see a conservative billionaire giving to a conservative nonprofit, there's $1 or probably $2 being given by a liberal billionaire to these same liberal nonprofits. It's a problem on both sides. I wouldn't say problem, but it's an issue on both sides. And so I think if they're going to be I think the Koch brothers, which is only one brother now because David died, it's one brother, but for every talk about the Koch brothers, conservatives can say, well, what about George Soros, who gives even more? And George Soros actually donates more money, not just to nonprofits, but to actual local campaigns and elections. And he had a whole campaign spending tens of millions of dollars to get district attorneys elected, local races. And that's an example of money in politics. So I have less of an issue with it when it comes to nonprofits. I think if you're a billionaire, you should be able to give as much money as you want to a nonprofit, because it's an example, I think, of free speech, of saying, hey, I made this money, it's mine, I can decide what to do with it, I can give to a cause that I care about. I'm fine with that. The issue that I actually have agreement with some liberals on is the influence of that money directly towards campaigns. I'm not crazy about the idea of a billionaire being able to cut a $50 billion check to a super PAC and it never go reported. It's dark money, and that $50 billion can be used to buy a house race because they can go just handpick a primary candidate and that PAC can spend $30 million on the race. I actually do have an issue with that because I think that's one person having an enormously outsized impact on our electoral process compared to the everyday American. And I think that's an example where left and right can maybe find some agreement saying like, hey, this is unfair influence. But when it comes to nonprofits, I think because they're not directly influencing campaigns in the same way, I think they're, I don't have an issue with that as much. Yeah. Question here, yeah.
So yeah, I just kind of want to add into the discussion about how there's kind of this, how do I put this? Kind of like this large scale nationwide of these like democratic leftist professors, right, who are putting money towards the people that they want to get elected into office. Right?
The money's less important than the ideas. I just bring up the money because I think it's an example of where their values lie.
Right. Okay. So we can say that. So if we disregard the money and we say there's these leftist professors who hold these ideas and they're supporting these candidates, like, is that really any different from any far right professors? There are far right professors that do exist. They're maybe not talked about here in this room today.
Yeah.
There's also far left professors. I'm not going to deny that either. But like, we have, it's not this homogeneous mix of professors who are all equally trying to like push like some sort of like agenda, right? There's not this like organized force of professors.
Yeah, it may not be organized. You don't have to be all coordinating. All right, here's what we're going to do, and on Monday, we're going to teach critical race theory. Like, I don't think there's that going on where all professors are getting together to do that. But when the overwhelming majority are all pushing in the same direction, they might as well be on a team. And it doesn't have to be a coordinated effort to have a huge impact. And yes, there are outliers. There are conservative professors that are outspoken. I think there are more that are closeted because they can't let the other faculty know what they believe for fear of reprisal. But I think the outliers there are not indicative of the broader structure. Like, you can look up studies on this. Many university systems have done studies. Internally, a lot of student newspapers have actually done polls over the years of the faculty on their campuses. There are campuses with 98, 99% self-identifying liberals among their professors, especially in like the humanities departments, things like that. But if the argument is that, well, it's not that big of an issue because there are conservative professors also, I might agree if the number of conservative professors pushing their ideas in class is equal or even close to equal. It's just not. I mean, it's a 10-to-1 ratio at most universities. I'd say even higher than that, actually. And so, like, it is a big issue. And I like the left always talks about the importance of like representation and the importance of like giving a voice to marginalized communities. In academia, like the marginalized voices are the conservative voices. Like, they're the ones that are systematically silenced. They're the ones that are told like, no, you don't have a place here. I would like to see the left care more about like providing more of an education to those people. And one more point I'll say too, I don't think the solution is conservative professors getting up every day and preaching their ideas. The solution is not conservative professors saying, here's my opinion. It's not actually opinion. Here's the facts. Here's what you all need to believe. Here's who you should vote for. I'm going to grade your papers differently if you're liberal. That is not the solution. The solution is to get all professors to say, hey, I might have some opinions on stuff. We can disagree. It's okay. But I'm not going to teach my opinion as fact, and I'm not going to taint your education by giving all of my ideas. I think that's like the solution is telling them, hey, just teach, like cut it out.
Yeah, I mean, and just kind of like a follow-up to that, and let's bring it kind of down to earth and not talk about some of the professors.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a professor in this room, so we'll just put it that way. We're all mostly students here, and you kind of talk about how there's this idea. There's not like really like a place for conservative students on campus, and they're not really able to kind of talk and discuss their ideas. I mean, you guys are all here. You guys look like you're having a good time. I'm personally.
I think a big point with that too is that there isn't a liberal media. You're not going to have like protesters or people trying to interrupt it. No, it's great you guys are here. but
Yeah, I think we're being civil.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, you are.
Well,
I don't think you
I-
came here to learn, I think you probably came here to argue and kind of be on the opposite side of it, but.
I just think that the biggest thing that, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
there's no institutional support
Yes.
for conservatism. As we mentioned, there are tons of events not only sponsored by the university, but also allowed by the university that they bring speakers that push more liberal leftist ideology, and they don't usually have to have cops in the room. And if they do, it's usually a university sponsored because it's the entire event is sponsored by the university. Or we had members out of their pockets pay for the cops here
And I'll
because the
say,
university required
so-
it, sorry.
to your point, also, no one is accusing you guys of causing a scene or acting the way that we see around, like, we've all seen hundreds of examples of that happening elsewhere, so I appreciate you
I
guys.
see an example of conservative freakouts, just.
More often than not, it tends to be the conservative.
Show me the videos after that. I want to see that because that's news. But I think to answer your original question, like on we're here, we're discussing this. This is not to say that there is no place for conservatives to get together. We're in a room right now, absolutely. The student group is recognized by the university, although it's a lot harder to get conservative clubs recognized by the university. That's absolutely accurate. But the difference is the conservative students who are doing that, there is a fear of retribution for letting it be known that they're doing that. And that is something that even if it's not coming from professors, there's this like social fear that they have where they know, hey, I don't really want to put that Turning Point USA sticker on my computer because people are going to come after me. Like, I don't want to have to deal with all that. I don't want a table because I cannot be the guy on campus that people know is conservative. And like that fear, like that actually does keep a lot of people away. I talk to a lot of apathetic students on college campuses, and the apathetic students will always say, no, I'm liberal, I guess. I think I'm liberal because they inherently know there's no fear that comes with identifying as liberal. Like they don't have to worry. If they lean right, they're just as likely to say, I don't really care, because they know that the only thing that's really going to get them pushback and get them hate is making it known that they're conservative. So like, I think that fear, I think there would be more people at this meeting right now, but they're worried about like, hey, I don't want to show up at that thing. Like, what's going to happen? Like, I don't really want people in Belmont affiliated with that. And I think that is like another issue in and of itself. And also, like, in closing on this point, like, I think liberal students should want more conservative ideas presented to them in class. One thing I used to do on campus is I would go and I would interview college students on like hot button issues. It wasn't like debating as much as it was just like, hey, what do you think about this? Just getting opinions on stuff. I overwhelmingly noticed that students who self-identified as conservative, which was 10 to 25% usually on campuses, the students who did that were much more eloquent in describing their ideas and much more willing to deal with pushback to those ideas. Because you don't just accidentally become conservative on a college campus. If you're like an outspoken conservative on a college campus or willing to tell people you are, you've heard so many of the left's ideas, you've had so much more pushback against you that you're used to it. And so you're like, yeah, I know what I believe, but more importantly, like I know why I believe it and I'm able to defend it. And one thing I saw time and time again, it made me sad, the students were like, yeah, I'm liberal. And the second that I would ask a question pushing back on that, they would kind of fold and they look at me like, what is happening right now? Like, you're not supposed to do this. Like, what's going on? And they would kind of be more likely to fold. And I think that's because they're not exposed to the ideas. And so they think they're radical because they never hear them. They're scared of them because they never hear them. But also their own ideas are never challenged. And so they get out of school having never been challenged, and they're intellectually weak because of that. Like, I think there are plenty of leftist students that are constantly doing their research and getting themselves educated. But the average college student who's a liberal, like, they're not used to having to say, here's why I believe what I do. So I think it's doing a disservice to students on the left. It's actually like making them weaker intellectually. And I think that's not fair. And I think that's why students on both sides should want more of a diversity of opinion in the classroom. I'll come here, but I'm gonna come here first. Yeah. Anyone who hasn't asked a question yet, before I come back for a second one? Yeah.
You want me to
Yeah,
go?
yeah, you got it.
Okay, so when I see liberals that talk about diversity, it's always about the social issues. It's always about who's oppressed, who's not oppressed, how can we make it work, or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like debating social issues is a very first world thing to do. Because you look at most countries in the world, they're not in a good position, just as how our country is. Our country is, across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, our neighbors are chill for the most part.
Those Canadians, I don't know about that. They want us to think they're nice.
Yeah. I used to live in the Middle East, so I know how it is to constantly have like, your neighbors, throwing bombs like in America. Like I used to live in Saudi Arabia because my dad used to work for a oil company. And there's been times when there's been like missile attacks by Iran or something. And I feel like Americans just generally take that for granted. Because like, if you only debate about social issues and not care about your foreign policy, you're not gonna have a country.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess my question is, when was the last time you actually seen a leftist care about foreign policy?
Yeah. So to your first point on like how so often the conversations with people on the other side do come back to like who's oppressed, who's not, social issues. I think a lot of that is intentional because it's kind of this like cultural Marxist philosophy of like the haves and the have-nots. And if you can boil everything down to the oppressed versus the oppressor, then you can shut people up essentially by saying like, I don't care what your ideas are, we can discount them because you're in the oppressor class. And so I think that's a calculated measure that goes on there. With regard to foreign policy, like, I think there's a delineation to be made between leftists and liberals on foreign policy. Like the establishment Democrat Party is not that different than the establishment neocon Republicans when it comes to foreign policy. Like there are plenty of neocons right now in Washington on the right who are calling for us to get boots on the ground in Ukraine. They want us to be there. They want another war because it benefits the military industrial complex and makes a lot of money for defense contractors, and they want a war. There are also plenty of establishment Democrats that are calling for that exact same thing. And it's kind of funny to see like this Venn diagram happening where I think leftists and more like kind of nationalist conservatives have become, I don't like the word isolationist, but have become more anti-war, where they agree now, like, hey, like we've seen the last 50 years of American foreign policy where we've got boots on the ground in every country. We can't point to an example of us being better off and being better perceived in those regions. And all the instability now that's going on, like maybe we can find some agreement here. So I think like, it's not as like black and white of like, the left never talks about foreign policy because there are people on the right that I can't stand because they're warmongers who agree with Democrats who would be liberals on that issue. And there are leftists that I'm like, actually, I agree on the foreign policy on this. Like Bernie Sanders, I'm like, I would never vote for you, but you're really anti-war. I'd get down with that. Let's go. I disagree with some of his stances on like the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but I'm like, hey, if someone's trying to keep us out of a war, I'm okay with that. So I think it's not as black and white on that issue, but I do think you bring up a great point on like how much of the conversations are centered on like the social side of it and like the feeling side of it and like all those things. Is there another question here?
Yeah, I guess my question, like I guess, so like he was saying that like, yeah, the situation in the Middle East is like living in the Middle East sounds absolutely miserable and absolutely terrible, but is that just a reason to just give up and like not improve our country in any way whatsoever? Just like try to go back to the way things were when Reagan was president?
Yeah, no, I think the sentiment more is that it's important to have perspective and it's important to understand like, hey, like I think there is a concerted effort to convince people here that they are oppressed. I think there is a clear effort to tell people to create oppression out of thin air, to tell them you are being oppressed, because then it's easier to like rally them against the oppressors who are on the other side. And so I think it's kind of creating out of thin air this conflict that is maybe not as legitimate as they think it is. And I think his point is more the idea of like, hey, like there is still very real oppression going on in the world. In the country you lived in, women couldn't drive until 2 years ago, and there's journalists getting butchered by the prince there. Like, I think it's more of a perspective issue than anything. I don't think anyone is saying, I don't think you're saying, is saying like, there's no problems here. Like, look at the rest of the world. Like, I think that would be kind of short-sighted. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't think that's what you're saying. Yes.
One of the things I've noticed is sort of like a through line through your whole speech was talking about how conservative ideas should be represented in the classroom, right?
Correct, yes.
But the thing is, some of these ideas, there's not really like a spectrum. There isn't really like a sort of like, oh, well, you can think one thing, but someone else can think another. Like, for example, transgender people existing. You know, this has been made a very political issue in the past couple of years when, I mean, it really isn't. And if you teach in the classroom, oh, the conservatives say that transgender people shouldn't be allowed to exist, they have to live as their assigned gender at birth.
That would be a
But
warped
then have a
perception of what conservative
liberal
people think.
professor say that,
That's a straw man.
oh,
That's,
transgender people exist.
no, I want to see, when I say conservative ideas represented, I mean an accurate representation of what they want. There are conservatives
Oh,
saying,
so what are
let's
your,
just,
what's your perspective then?
on what?
On transgender people, like what should a transgender person do?
You can dress however you want. A transgender person can use whatever name they want. They can ask people to use whatever pronouns they want. But the problem becomes when you start telling me the pronouns that I must use for you, and when you start telling me that I must agree with things that are not real and scientific, in the sense that you cannot convince me to say, yes, we should have transgender women, biological men playing women's sports, because that's a big one right now. Like, you cannot convince me that that's something that we should allow simply because someone says, well, this is how I feel. Like, there are two sides to that. And I would like to see professors say, yeah, the conservative side on this is here. There aren't conservatives saying that you shouldn't be allowed to exist. That's a straw man. That's not what
I
conservatives
went
are
to a
saying.
Catholic school my whole life. I went to a Catholic school from elementary school to high school, and this is my first time in a public school, and that was the teaching the entire time. And these people were conservative. One of the sisters who taught a theology class held up an article with Trump on the headline, Trump's picture there, saying that he was a martyr for the faith because he was advocating against abortion. So there are plenty of conservatives. I mean, Michael Knowles, for example, said that transgenderism should be eradicated.
Yes, the idea. Yes.
That's an integral part of several people's identities.
Yes, the cultural idea that men can become women, which they cannot.
Well,
The cultural idea that men can become women, and that our entire culture has to ignore science, ignore reality, ignore truth, and redefine what truth is. That our culture, which is saying, nope, this is how it is, we're rewriting it, that idea should be eradicated because it is false. It is based on something that is not true, that we should be a culture that strives to embrace truth, as all human beings should do, and that is not an idea that we should rewrite and say, no, this is actually true now, and that words matter, truth matters, and that we should try our best to eradicate ideologies that call us to turn our back on truth. And I think that's the point that he's making. Yeah, let's go. I want to get to other topics. I'll stick around
with that. You have used my preferred name, Ellie, throughout this entire talk. It's not my legal name. That's my actual name, but I gave it to you.
Okay,
and
I have
using
plenty
it
of
this whole time. So
I have plenty of friends.
If you think that someone's gender identity, well, not gender identity, but like their biological sex is entirely determinate, and that their birth name or whatever name is on their legal ID is entirely determinate over who they are, then why have you been using the wrong name for me?
I have friends that are named Benjamin, who go by the name Ben. I will call them Ben because that is a name, and it's not implying that it's a compulsory element. If you told me to use your preferred pronouns, that I would not do, because that is me saying that you can be a she or her, which I do not believe is something that you can do. And so that is where the line is. I'll use your name. I'm happy to do that.
Well,
but
it's Ellie's not a girl's name.
It's a name. I mean, there are plenty of names that can be whatever. The difference there is when you start saying that I have to use pronouns. I think we don't have to. I'll stick around as long as you want to talk. I want to make sure we get to other topics here, but I'm more than happy to talk afterwards. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on like the integrity of the last election?
Yeah, so this one, I might lose some of my friends on this one. I think that there were elements and examples of fraud in the election. I wanted to believe Trump that there was a completely rigged election and he should have won. I have yet to see clear enough evidence to believe that the election was rigged. I think that two things can be true at once. You can say there was fraud that happened. There absolutely was.
Or was it enough?
I do not think that it was enough to influence millions of votes. No, I don't. And I think that, and I do believe that Trump lost the election. And I was waiting very, very carefully to see these lawyers who I think lied to us. I think Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis, they lied to us. And they have now admitted on the record that they lied to us. Some of them have come forward plea deals, but they have said, hey, over and over, they said, we're going to unleash the Kraken. The evidence is coming. I was really excited for that because I'm like, this is huge. Like, if they really did this, this is the biggest story in American history. This is huge. And I kept waiting. And yes, there were scattered examples of evidence happening, but not on the scale that they were promising. And so I personally felt let down
where I felt like I was being deceived. And I do believe that Trump knowingly played up the extent to which the election was rigged, and that disappoints me. And so I think that the ways that it was rigged are twofold. I think it was rigged by the media in the sense that in the weeks before the election, these stories that they allowed to get out, the Hunter Biden laptop story. Now, it's easy to like laugh about the laptop story now because it's been years and we've all seen the embarrassing photos. And I don't really care about some of it in there, like whatever, he texted to his ex-wife, who cares? But like the actual stuff on there talking about like Joe Biden's involvement in Chinese companies and Ukrainian oil companies and gas companies, like that's a big story. And we had access to that the weeks before the election. We know it was accurate. The FBI had actually confirmed it was accurate. And you could not share a link to that story on social media. Facebook and Twitter would block that link from being posted. You could not talk about it. It was misinformation. That's like one of the biggest October surprises you could have right before the election. And there has been polling where they've shown would the existence of this laptop, if you knew it was true at the time of the election, have influenced your voting. Swing states. And there were states where it changed 2 or 3% of people's minds, especially on the overseas business dealings. Changed 2 or 3% of people's minds. That would have been a huge difference maker in the election. So I think the media played a role in suppressing a story that they had no reason to doubt was accurate. They suppressed that story, they rigged it that way. And the bigger issue I had from a like election rigging standpoint was the way that state governments bypassed their own constitutions in changing election laws during COVID. Like the way that they dealt with ballot harvesting and early voting and absentee voting and extending it so they had election month instead of election day. There were state laws, many of them, Pennsylvania, for example, you have to go through both chambers, the House and Senate in Pennsylvania, to pass any laws related to election laws. They passed I think it was the governor passed an executive order on the matter, and they completely changed what was going on. And they said, well, it's COVID era, we have to do things, we have to protect people. They changed election law to make it easier to, send in absentee ballots for a month ahead of time. Whatever your thoughts are on that law, that's unconstitutional. They passed a law that is not allowed to pass because it didn't go through both chambers. And so like states doing that, I think is an example of them, that's I think an example of election fraud. But as far as like voting machines that switched over millions of votes or people stuffing, tens of thousands of ballots in boxes, we just haven't seen the evidence of it. Like the Arizona GOP did a huge internal review and they found like a few hundred examples of dead people voting and people with the wrong addresses and stuff. And so I've just yet to see the scale. They provide the evidence in court when Trump is defending himself in Georgia. I'll admit I was wrong, but I don't think that it was the scale to which we would like to believe. Any other questions? We'll do like 2 or 3 more questions. I don't want to keep everyone forever. I'll stick around and talk as long as people want, like I said. Yes.
Yeah, how do you have like a productive conversation? Because I'll be like, I love the person who I'm debating with because, my personal belief, we're all made like this of God.
Yeah.
You can't hate anything that is made in the image of God. And so I love the person I'm debating with, and they'll call me every name in the book, and I feel like nothing gets to them.
Yeah.
And you didn't actually do anything. And if anything, I may have even fulfilled some of their stigmas because they're like, oh, he actually does believe this. And then they didn't actually hear anything I said.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm very concerned about this. So how do you have a productive conversation?
I think first, not assuming that they are motivated by the same things you are. I used to go table on college campuses, and I would all these different campuses. You set up a table, you get posters, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have done on campus. And when people come up and talk, a lot of times I would assume, hey, I'm conservative because of these issues. I'm going to talk about those. And then we have a conversation and be like, yeah, I don't care about you guys stuff you're talking about, and it wouldn't change their mind. So I always like to start a conversation off with like, hey, what are the issues that you care about most? Or like, hey, we got an election next year. What is a candidate going to have to do to get your vote? Like, what are the things that like really get you going? Like the 2 or 3 issues you care about the most. And then like tailor your approach that way. And say, okay, here's your views on this. Like, all right, like you care about that. Here's the conservative response to that. And so you can like, the starting point is, you're talking about something they care about. And so I would say that first, like asking questions, finding out what they care about, but also understanding you're not going to win everyone over. You're not going to change everyone's mind. Like if you go into every conversation thinking like, this is like my chance, I'm going to get you on this one again. By the end of this conversation, you're going to be crying and you say, thank you, you changed my mind. Like I see the light now. Like that's not going to happen for everyone. And like, that's okay. And understand also, like, don't waste all your time on those conversations. That doesn't sound like super nice, but if the goal is to win over as many people as you can on a campus, it's better for you to spend an hour talking to 30 different students who walk by than an hour talking to the one student that's just trying to get a rise out of you when you're debating. It's not as productive. You can have that conversation at some point, but like understand, hey, they're kind of just draining my time and energy right now where I could be finding like winnable people. And also understanding, like, for me as a Christian, I've always tried to find ways to like share the gospel with people because I think it's the greatest gift I have. And so, like, when I talk to people who are not believers, if I don't like win them over, if they don't like accept Jesus, I don't go home and be like, man, what a failure, I can't believe that. Like, I have to keep the mindset of like, hey, I'm planting seeds right now. Like, I'm putting a seed there. Maybe someone will come along later and water it. Maybe someone will come along and prune it. Maybe someone will figure like, I may not be the one that sees it come to harvest, but I'm planting little seeds. And understanding like, it takes people 20, 30, 40 conversations sometimes before they change their mind on stuff. And so understanding that you may just play a small part in that. Don't lose heart in that. Yeah, we'll do question here and then we'll end here. Yeah.
Have we ever looked, talking about that today?
Talking about what?
Just visuals?
Oh. I have not actually. I don't spend a ton of time with him directly. He's based in Boca Raton. His studio's down in Florida. And so he's in the office like a couple times a month. But our show, Morning Wire, is pretty separated from the other shows. So I have not talked about Jesus with him. I will say, like, one thing I love about the Daily Wire is there are a lot of religious conversations that take place. And it's really cool because we have Catholics, Protestants, we have Orthodox Jews, and kind of secular Jews. Like, we have people all over the place. And it is fun. Like, no one's like, oh, I can't talk about Jesus because HR might get me. Like, people are like, hey, let's talk about it. This is cool. And so I've been very encouraged by that there's no like fear of like the hammer getting dropped on you if you talk about that. Last question here, yeah.
Yeah, so personally, I'm not a Christian, but what you, because I know a lot of conservatives, religion is a big part of the ideology.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, I think, if you want the state to be small, you have to also not have religion involved. And so I guess my question would be, do you think that religion being involved in government is a slippery slope to a much bigger issue in the future?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between saying we're going to use the government to compel people to attend church, or we're going to use the government to create some theocracy. There's a difference between that and saying I have been elected to represent my constituency. People put me in office to vote how they know how I'm going to vote. They picked me. And allowing your religious views to influence the way that you vote and the way that you legislate. I think there's a difference between saying like, my values are going to inform the decisions I make, and that's how I'm going to legislate, versus I'm going to now tell everyone else that you have to agree with me. I think those are two very different things. I think the country would be a much better place if we had more politicians and legislators following the values of the Bible in the way that they were legislated. And I think the whole concept of separation of church and state, a lot of people think it's in the Constitution. It's not. It was one line in a letter by Thomas Jefferson, and one letter that he wrote, and it's quite out of context, the idea people have, and I think people try and use it to like scare politicians out of allowing their religion to be brought into their job. And also understanding like there are a lot of people that think they aren't religious that are still dogmatic and have a religion that they're following, even if they don't call themselves religious. And I think that there are all sorts of religions that people on both sides follow, and they vote because of that religion, and they try and push that religion. Like, I think there's like an LGBTQ plus religion that people are trying to push in their ideologies. That actually is an example of them trying to force it onto people. I think there's like a climate religion where people are saying that everything has to be viewed through the lens of climate change and the environment. Like, there are religions that may not have to do with theology, but are religions nonetheless in their dogmatism. All right, all in there.
Awesome.
We get a picture.
We will get a group picture. Yeah, let's get a group picture right now. So yeah, definitely students mainly. Chris Merrill is our advisor, so I'd love to have you in it as well.
Thank you, Chris.
But any student who attended, even if you aren't like active in the club or anything, we'd still love for you guys to be in the picture.
Now, I used to hold up these posters.
All right, who wants free speech?
I
I want to think it's not illegal yet.
I'll be sure that says that, so.
And then awake, not woke.
I'll take that one.
Take that one. And then,
oh, look at me.
Cattle.
I'm not.
You should hold your own.
No.
Hold yours.
Here's why I never hold signs.
All right, like half you can look.
So Photoshop something
Yep.
else.
I held a sign and then I went to speak at the University of Florida. And these students like photoshopped me holding a sign of an object. This is so uneven. It's actually pretty funny.
Last
Did
night
you?
I had you equal subscribe because I was live streaming.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be ridiculous. I think it was some great lighting.
Is that live stream gonna be on like your YouTube channel?
It's already on there.
Cool.
It's still live right now. They're all watching it.
Oh, they wanted me to ask.
Thank you.
You gave us bad angles, didn't you?
It's plot.
He's trying to make us all look bad. Thank you for taking that.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. Once again, thank you guys so much for a wonderful 4.5 years, whether I met you within or around the time I started it to any time recently. Thank you so much. This is my last 30-point event. Good job.
Change, dude.
Hey, you go ahead. I was on Amazon.
I was gonna ask, is it real gold?
Nope, it is. It's part of
Yeah. I love that the chains have come back.
Yeah.
Like I feel like they're cool again. I don't know what.
I get asked all the time. I think it's really sad because I get asked, they're like, "Are you like actually Christian, or are you just wearing it?" I'm like, I'm Irish Catholic. Like, I was born and raised Irish Catholic. Pretty into it.
Let me know if you need more troops. I don't know if
They
like metal was like conducting the heat or something.
I run like 5-7 miles every morning, and I have this on, and like it absolutely like it gets itchy sometimes. So I take it off and wash it after every walk.
Yeah, that's just a little bit funny right there.
I'm proud of it because I worked 7 months ago. I was like 205 pounds, very overweight, and I was not happy with myself. I woke up every morning, and I did my son here. I'll get to better. 45 pounds. I just had my first physical in several years, and then I'm like, perfect, you are like perfectly fit and everything. I was like, yeah, I felt really good. So.
My wife is 6 months pregnant.
Yeah.
First, so there's so many nights.
Yeah.
You would really in the mornings, I'm like,
What are you doing after this? I know you guys are really?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
You guys were on the
Man, I'm just gonna go
like Mexico.
Yeah, a little bit. There's a place, I don't know what kind of goes, but it's some brewery is also good. They might get burgers and stuff. I mean, I know a lot of good bars.
I'm gonna make them take you to the fanciest restaurant.
That's not really gonna be that be probably Medici, maybe. Medici in our uptown area, but even still, it's not like super. Like it's Bloomington. Like, Nacho and agave.
I didn't know your name was Josh. Josh. Oh, nice. What kind of drink?
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Until next time, you've been watching Speechless.
My favorite one.